If you've been watching X-Men 97, then you're familiar with government official Val Cooper, who might not be Val Cooper, as many theorize the character potentially might be Mystique, masquerading as Val Cooper. And while I myself believed that at first, after the most recent episode, I don't necessarily think that is possible anymore. But who knows, maybe she still is Mystique. Just playing the really long game. Is or isn't Mystique, Val Cooper is still a comic book character in her own right, who by the way is actually a pretty interesting character, as to why I wanted to make a video about her. She would make her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men issue 176 from 1983, which is a comic I for some reason had 3 physical copies of, and 2 digital copies of, on different sites. To be fair, it's one of my favorite eras of X-Men, but even then I still am a bit confused as to why I have so many copies of this one issue in particularly. We first meet her as a part of a court scene about a discussion about the potential threat of mutants, and if one day they could become the majority opposed to their current minority, starting off with a direct fear of mutants herself. Believing them to be an actual threat, that needs to be taken care of, even bumping elbows with people like Henry Gyrich of all people. The person who would eventually assassinate Professor X. So yeah, she started off as not necessarily the best person. Just simply hanging out with radical mutant hate groups, and seemingly potentially being someone that supports them. Also, this issue is Cyclops fighting an octopus. I didn't need to tell you that, but I did because it was entertaining to read. Maybe that's why I have 5 copies of this issue. Val would also be shown to be behind enlisting Forge to help make the mutant dampeners in issue 184. That, like in the show, would eventually be weaponized far enough to depower Storm. She would also become a supporting character and somewhat villain in the X-Factor comics, where she would create a Marvel-type Suicide Squad team called the Freedom Force, which would consist of villains like Mystique and Blob, but also heroes like Spider-Woman, and she would have the Freedom Force go against the X-Factor, playing a bit of a villain role. Still believing that X-Men and the X-Factor and just mutants in general were a threat. Although a little hypocritical considering the fact that she's using mutants like Mystique and Blob to fight them. She would even cross over into other story plots, including being a part of the US Agent storyline, having been a part of choosing John Walker as becoming America's next superhero, which in a way would backfire when he would decide to go against the government. Although in the MCU that role be swapped out for another Val, that being Val de Fontana, who's a separate government Val character from the comics. Yes, there's a lot of characters named Val in the American government. Although technically they have different names, one's Valerie, the other one is Valentina. But I guess the name Val just screams government official. While this was a character starting ground, that as being a mutant disliker as well as just simply being a sketchy government official, that wouldn't be where the character Val would stick. Instead, her ideals would slowly evolve, becoming a government contact for the X-Men, starting out in the role as a way to watch over them, believing that they were dangerous. However, would find herself surprisingly tolerated them, and even like members of the team, gaining respect for not only the X-Men but other mutants, even if it was a bit of a bumpy ride to get there. Which would also prove the point that tolerance isn't always forced. And there's other ways to overcome hate, and that sometimes it's by changing someone's mind. Which was very much the case for Val Cooper, who will go from hating mutants or simply just being afraid of them to kinda becoming friends with some of them. She would go as far as inspire other mutants to form a new team, that being a new X-Factor who she would lead, composing of Havoc, Polaris, and Quicksilver, as well as a few others. Unfortunately, villains would take mental control of her and use her place in the government as a weapon. Even after being freed of their control and her teammates knowing it wasn't her, their relationship was so heavily damaged enough that she would eventually turn the leader role into Forge. Which in itself is a bit of a full circle event, considering their previous working agreement about Forge helping her depower mutants, but to now give him the title to inspire more. That being the X-Factor's new leader. It's a nice touch considering their history. She would however regain their respect after she would risk her life to save Havoc, and use her position in the government to help mutants, not only respecting mutants, but also fighting for them. With the character becoming an advocate for mutant kind, which in itself, yet again, is full circle considering where the character started off from. Mystique would also impersonate her for a while, as to why many people think that the character very much is doing so on the X-Men 97 show. There's also a few little clues and hints towards that there was something up with Val as a character. However, as of the latest episode, we already got an answer as to why there's no body found on Genosha of hers. Therefore, I don't think that she actually is Mystique anymore, unless, like I said, she's playing the really long game, which if she is, props to her, because she's really just sitting there as all these things unfold and not doing anything about it. When if she was Mystique, you would think that she would at least try. If you can't tell, I'm trying my best to not spoil anything, but I probably already did. Without even knowing. But I'm trying. Also, just because I don't think that she is Mystique doesn't mean that she isn't, because I very much could be wrong. I just don't think she is anymore, to be honest. Which in itself is fine, because Val Cooper is a character in her own right that is also pretty interesting in her own right. With or without being Mystique, I think this character overall is still a pretty good character for the show. And a good addition to a morally gray area. As of more modern comics, Val is simply just a cameo or a guest appearance. But she still shouldn't have respect for the X-Teams, as well as simply just having friendships with some characters like Havoc and Polaris. I think that the character is really interesting in how she grew, starting off as being afraid and falling for mutant hate, only to see that she was wrong. And that things aren't so black and white with mutants. It's a very strong showing of how love is stronger than hate, winning her over in the end. That sometimes the best way of defeating an enemy is by making them your friend. Or defeating hate by showing that it's wrong. I just think that the idea of that is very powerful and is a very interesting storytelling for the X-Men. Because there's just a very strong level of realism to that idea, that someone could come over their own hatred for somebody. That some people can be saved from their own hate. Just like Val was. I do hope the character returns at some point in comics, as, like said, right now the character is kind of just cameo guest appearances. When she could be so much more, like the Nick Fury for the X-Men. Or at the very least, the Maria Hill for the X-Men. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!